Wembley Football Stadium in London might appear to have no connection to Chinese history, but 100 years ago, during the British Empire exhibition of 1924, a small slice of Hong Kong was recreated right here for the amusement of the British public. Over 100 people were transported from Hong Kong to England for the project, including Chinese pharmacists, a team of silk makers, and a chef who had previously cooked for the Chinese emperor. These Chinese workers carried out their daily lives for about 18 months, in the process being observed by the British public, and then they were sent back home and the small model Chinese village was forgotten about. Today, virtually no one knows about this lost history. So, I have come to Wembley Park in London to uncover the lost history of the Hong Kong Pavilion of the British Empire Exhibition 1924. In a moment, we will examine Wembley Park from above to rediscover the lost Hong Kong Pavilion. But first, a little background about the British Empire Exhibition. The aim of the exhibition was to educate the British public on the culture and industry of the British Empire's various overseas colonies, in the process helping to showcase the benefits of empire and to stimulate trade with the colonies. The exhibition was declared open by King George V on April the 23rd, 1924, in the first ever radio broadcast by a British monarch. The exhibition ran for 6 months, closing on the 1st of November 1924. But it was so popular with the British public that it opened again for a second season between May and October 1925. Across the 2 seasons, the exhibition attracted over 27 million visitors. The exhibition itself consisted of a theme park-like complex which was built on Wembley Park, which had previously been a rural pleasure ground on the outskirts of London. The centrepiece of the exhibition was Empire Stadium, a colossal football stadium that served as the venue of the British FA Cup final from its completion in 1923 up until it closed in the year 2000. The original Empire Stadium was demolished between 2002 and 2003 to be replaced by the modern Wembley Stadium in 2007. To the north of the Empire Stadium were the Palace of Industry and the Palace of Engineering, which were built to showcase British industry and engineering respectively. These were the world's largest reinforced concrete buildings at the time. Dispersed across the rest of the park were 56 pavilions, each of which was dedicated to one of the British Empire's colonies and was staffed by people from that region. They included the Burmese Pavilion, which consisted of a Buddhist temple carved from Burmese teak wood, within which one could find traditional Burmese dances. The Nigerian Pavilion highlighted the mud-walled dwellings of the natives and the artistic wood carvings that they produced. And the Australian Pavilion showcased life in the faraway colony, tempting some of the British to emigrate there. The Indian Pavilion was one of the largest, which is not surprising considering its status as the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. Accordingly, India was also represented on the flag of the exhibition, alongside Britain and the British settler domains of Canada, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. The pavilions of the majority white colonies were made of what was at the time a pioneering new technology, reinforced concrete. Consequently, many of these buildings were repurposed as warehouses and factories after the exhibition. In contrast, the majority of the pavilions of the non-white territories were made of the same materials used for buildings back in their colonies, such as wood and earth. Therefore, they were torn down soon after the exhibition ended, and their contents were sold at auction. Yet, over the following century, the reinforced concrete buildings were eventually also torn down to make way for newer, more modern buildings.
The local council, Brent Council, records that the last of the original exhibition buildings to be demolished was the Palace of Industry, which was removed in 2013. This is the last remnant of that building, a reinforced concrete stone lion, which originally served as one of the foundations for a flagpole which was around the side of the building.
So, what about the Hong Kong Pavilion? This map from 1924 shows us the layout of the exhibition. As we can see, the Hong Kong Pavilion is located in a rather obscure position in the far southeast of the park. To its north was the West Indies and British Guiana Pavilion, and to the west was the Ceylon Pavilion, which is present-day Sri Lanka.
Because Wembley Park has been completely redeveloped over the last 100 years, it is hard today to locate exactly where the Chinese pavilion would have stood. So we have to take to the skies and compare some historical photographs with the view today.
This is the view of Wembley Park in April 2021, as seen from the western angle.
Unfortunately, the whole of Wembley Park is a no-fly zone, so we can't get too close to the stadium itself.
By comparing this image from 1924 with the view today, we can see that the two skylines are virtually incomparable. The only recognisable feature from the 1924 photo is the train tracks, which are still in the original position. The Hong Kong Pavilion was based about 400 metres east of Wembley Stadium, by the side of the train tracks.
The train tracks give us an approximate idea of where the Chinese pavilion would have stood, but if we look at the same view from a southern angle, we can pinpoint exactly where it would have been located.
It was only after I compared the southern view of Wembley Park today with the southern view in 1924 that I realised that there is in fact one original building from the Empire exhibition which is still standing today.
The building behind me, which today is home to a vehicle garage, several logistics companies and a few nightclubs, used to be the South Africa Pavilion at the British Empire exhibition, and we can use this surviving building to locate the Hong Kong Pavilion.
New houses were built to the south of the Hong Kong Pavilion in the decades following the exhibition, and if we also compare the southern view today with the same view in 1949, we can see that the street layout remains identical today. Therefore, by taking the old South African pavilion and the old street layout as our two bearings, we can pinpoint exactly where the Hong Kong Pavilion would have stood.
Right, here we are. This is the location where the Hong Kong Pavilion used to stand. Today, it is a new car park for Wembley Stadium. There is not even a marker which records its existence, yet all is not lost. Through the analysis of some primary materials, we can bring the Hong Kong Pavilion back to life.
The Hong Kong Pavilion was constructed in 1923 using materials that were sourced from China so that it would feel authentically Chinese. The finished pavilion was rectangular in shape and stood out from the other pavilions because of its bright colours. In their review of the pavilion, the Wakefield Advertiser and Gazette commented, "Colour, of which the Chinese are still the world's masters, is the dominating feature of the street." The pavilion itself was divided into several sections. On the northern side, facing the pedestrian street in front of the pavilion, were two Chinese-style arches. Visitors would pass through these arches to enter the complex. The southern stretch of the pavilion consisted of a row of 24 shops, which sold everything from Chinese medicine, ivoryware, porcelain, lacquerware, and jade, alongside food such as chili sauce and lychees. The merchants present, who were all from Hong Kong, were chosen by a committee consisting of members of the Hong Kong government and both the Chinese and the Hong Kong Chambers of Commerce. The original rules of the Empire exhibition stipulated that the products on sale at each pavilion had to originate from the colony that the pavilion was representing. But because Hong Kong mostly just sold products which had been made in mainland China and produced very little itself, the then Governor of Hong Kong, Sir Reginald Stubbs, intervened and requested that the rules be relaxed for Hong Kong. Therefore, products produced in mainland China were permitted to be sold at the Hong Kong Pavilion. The rooms at the sides of the entrance gates were a series of exhibition rooms which contained models of Hong Kong, the Swire and Whampoa dockyards, as well as models of Hong Kong ships, named junks. Also on display were a team of silk makers who demonstrated the entire manufacturing process involved in the production of silk. The idea was devised by Sir Robert Ho Tung, who owned the silk farm in Hong Kong. He hoped to use the exhibition as a means of promoting Chinese silk to the growing British middle class. Located in the central hall on the north side of the pavilion was the Chinese restaurant. The Hong Kong Pavilion was one of the few pavilions which had a restaurant, and this turned out to be the most popular attraction at the pavilion. The head chef had previously worked at the Imperial Palace in Beijing, and he knew how to cook many rare Chinese delicacies. Dishes on the menu included bird's nest soup, shark's fin, and 1,000-year-old egg. The restaurant was complete with a Chinese orchestra and Chinese waiters. The Empire exhibition occurred at a very sensitive time in Hong Kong. Just a year earlier, in the spring of 1922, over 30,000 Chinese seamen went on strike for 6 weeks, demanding higher wages. The Hong Kong economy had suffered severely as a result. At the same time, Chinese nationalist movements, which sought to force the British out of Hong Kong, were on the rise in China. Despite this, the Hong Kong Pavilion at the British Empire exhibition was a relative success, helping to increase the profile and the fortunes of the Hong Kong merchants present. The pavilion also did a good job of showing Hong Kong's successful incorporation into the British Empire and for raising the British public's understanding of their Far East colony. Writing in the Bystander newspaper in July 1924, A. Thompson wrote that the pavilion helped rekindle in the British the deep loyalty that they had for the entirety of their empire and acted as a portal to the far, remote, and infinitely mysterious Hong Kong. Whilst the exhibition itself was a success, the fate of the pavilion is less clear. After the exhibition ended, the majority of the surrounding pavilions were promptly dismantled, yet the Hong Kong Pavilion survived for many years to come. Records in the National Archives in London show that the London North Eastern Railway Company leased the pavilion and the surrounding land to a company called Motor House Limited in December 1928. From this time onwards, the pavilion was likely used as storage for car parts. We don't know what happened to the original contents of the pavilion. The last photo with the Hong Kong Pavilion clearly visible is this aerial shot from 1949. After this time, the pavilion does not appear again in photographs and was lost to history.
And that's the history of the Hong Kong Pavilion at the British Empire Exhibition 1924. If you enjoyed the documentary, make sure you like the video, you subscribe to the channel, and you hit the bell button so you are notified of any future uploads. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.